Hello, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Sheila from Different Strokes, and I take great pleasure in welcoming you to the latest in our 2023 webinar series. If you've attended one previously, it's good to see you again, but if not, if this is your first time, it's good to have you with us. So we'll be running these webinars every few weeks this year, so please keep an eye on our website and socials for details of future sessions. And please let us know if there's any specific topics that you would like us to cover. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Dr. Fran Allen and Fran Hallam-Bowles of the University of Nottingham to discuss falls prevention. Before we go into their presentation, we'll just cover some brief housekeeping. The session is being recorded, but no details of anyone watching are being captured, and the only people that appear on screen are myself, Fran and Fran. There's a chat function as well. Please use this to say hello to us and give us any general comments that you want to post. There's also a Q&A function as well. Please use this for any questions. Make sure you don't put any questions in the chat because they might be missed and we'd hate to miss them. We've already received some questions in advance, and time permitting, we'll cover as many of these as possible and any that come through today. And now I'm delighted to hand over to Fran and Fran.
Hello. Let me just share my screen. But before I disappear, thank you so much for inviting us to talk to you about falls prevention today. Just to be really confusing, we are both Fran. We are the Frans of falls prevention. And we're both physiotherapists who now, we both work in falls prevention research. So hopefully we've got an interesting presentation for you today. And obviously we're here to answer any questions at the end. So I am going to share my screen if I can make this work, if I can make the technology work. There we go. And hopefully you can all see a title slide. Brilliant. So we're going to talk to you a little bit today, sort of between about 20 and 30 minutes. We're going to talk a little bit about falls after stroke, what causes falls, and what you can do to help prevent those falls. But I should say that there's no magic bullet. There's no one thing that we're going to say that is going to be the absolute thing that stops you falling ever again. There are lots of things you can do, and what we know is if you take the right actions, you can prevent falls, you can reduce your risk of falls. But it's not like clickbait. This one magic trick will help you never fall again. But hopefully we can give you some tips and things to think about that will help you prevent falls in the future. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to hand over to Fran, if that will go, to talk about what falls are.
Thanks, Fran, and yeah, thanks for inviting us to come and speak today. So I'm going to start off with talking a little bit about what is a fall. So I'm assuming that if you've joined this webinar today, that maybe falls have affected you some way personally, or maybe it's something that you may be worrying about. But what we quite often talk about falls, but what do we really mean by that? And so this here on the side is a definition of what a fall is classed as. So it's classed as a person unintentionally coming to rest on the ground or a lower level. So that might be you're walking along and you fall over and you fall to the ground, or it could be other things as well. So it could be that you maybe go to sit down in a chair and you misjudge where the edge of the seat is. It could be that you slip or slide, but maybe save yourself by holding on to something. Or it could be feeling dizzy when you're standing up from a chair or from the bed and then falling back onto the chair. So a fall actually encapsulates lots of different things, not just always walking along and then tripping over and ending up on the floor. Can you move the slide on, please, Fran? And I won't dwell on this too long, but because we want to really focus on prevention and those things that we can do to prevent falls. But I think it is quite important to acknowledge that falls can have effects on people and they can affect them in different ways. And so there are some physical effects. So for instance, falls might result in injuries or pain. There are also psychological effects, which I think are probably sometimes overlooked a little bit more. Quite common what people tell us when they've had a fall is it can knock their confidence, and it can sort of have that effect on your own confidence and how you feel about yourself. It can sometimes cause fear or anxiety about doing specific things. Perhaps the situation where you had the fall, you try and avoid that situation again. And that can lead to loss of independence. It can mean that we don't maybe do the things that we enjoy doing, and our social circle, we maybe don't access that as much. And all of those things can really affect our quality of life. So we want to try and prevent falls as much as we can. Next slide, please. I think that's you actually, Fran. Sorry, I've put myself on.
I think it is me, sorry. So sort of following on from what Fran was just saying, that actually, falling is one of the most common consequences or complications following stroke. So if you're having a fall, then you are not alone. So 73% of people will have at least one fall in their first year after their stroke, and that you can go in patterns and waves of having more falls or less falls. So don't feel that you're alone. Don't feel that you've done something wrong. It is just a very common complication, and it can make regaining skills and confidence, as Fran said, just more difficult following your stroke. There isn't a particular link between the type of stroke you've had and your falls risk. Research hasn't been able to find that link. It can just be dependent on what you're doing and what you're able to do, or sort of levels of fatigue. And we're just going to talk a little bit now about what the causes of falls are, because by addressing those causes, that's what we hope to reduce the risk of falls. So we would split falls risk into sort of three types, really. There's the physical, environmental, and behavioural. So physical risks are those that are caused sort of from within, sort of caused through changes to your body, or things happening within your body. So things like this would be things like medications and side effects from medications. And what we do know is if you're taking more than 4 prescription medications at a time, that can increase your risk of falls. Things like dizziness, and changes to your sort of spatial awareness, things like neglect or problems, navigating through space can cause trips and falls. Things like if you have sort of other illnesses, so if you have an infection, that can cause some dizziness and falls, reduced blood pressure. And then there's also things like gait and balance, and I know we are going to talk about that in a little bit more detail later. I think Fran's going to talk to you about that. And then environmental, these are the ones you sort of probably think about most, the things that are happening outside. So these are things that cause you to trip over. So clutter, spillages, furniture of sort of incorrect height. Fran was saying about, coming to rest or slipping out of a chair, trying to get up onto high beds, can all cause types of falls. And then things like lighting and temperature can affect how you navigate through space, and that can cause a fall. And then there's the behavioural things, and these are the things that you choose to do or not to do, or decisions you make. And it's actually really hard, isn't it, to sort of say, well, actually, I think I might be at risk of a fall, and I'm going to act in a different way because of that. And sometimes it's hard, it's hard to accept that you might need to make these changes. But these behavioural changes are things like, wearing the right footwear for the task you're doing, talking, making it known to other people that you might need to have a rest, if you've got fatigue, things like not rushing to the loo, not leaving it, things like urgency can all impact. And it's always when you're thinking about something else or doing something in a hurry that increases your risk of having a fall. So how to prevent falls. This is what we're here for. How do we stop them from happening? So what we're going to talk about, we've got a little case study. Going to introduce you to Sarah, who is 29 years old, and 1 year ago she suffered from an ischemic stroke. She had a blockage, an infarct, which was then treated with thrombolytics. So she was sort of back up, but remains with weakness on her left hand side. She has some spatial awareness problems and suffers from increased fatigue. She tires quite quickly. She lives with a partner, and they've got a dog, and they're in a house, but she has returned to work as a primary school teacher. So she's got a busy job, but she has had a couple of falls within the last year. So once at home when she was turning around in the lounge, and then also once when she was out with her friends after work. So fatigue was playing a part. And now we're just going to look at some of the things that Sarah could do to help reduce her risk of having further falls. So things that Sarah can do to reduce falls. The first one would be she could go and see her GP to look at medications, to see if there's any medications that could be causing her to have an increased falls risk. There's lots of different medications that cause dizziness, and also while she's visiting a GP, she can have a blood pressure checked, like a lying and standing blood pressure, to see whether there's a drop when she stands up, which again can cause dizziness. Medication reviews can also be requested through your pharmacist. They're actually very good, and sometimes these days can be a little bit more accessible, and they can just sort of recommend, and that can then go back to GP if there's anything that's been prescribed that could be causing your increased falls risk. The second thing that Sarah could look at would be lighting. So something like fitting night lights. So if you get up to go to the loo in the night, especially with the dog, if the dog's anywhere sleeping in your anywhere near your bedroom or sort of around the house, to like the little plug-in night lights can really help prevent trips and falls at night. And failing that, just switching the light on when you get up. It can also work wonders. And again, when we're talking about, like, if you've got dogs and pets, maybe consider having those shut in a different room if you think you're going to be up and around, because they can create a falls risk. But obviously they're a vital member of the household, so we would never suggest that the dog goes to live anywhere else. The paint cans here represent colour contrast. Now, obviously it's really fashionable these days, many different shades of grey, and to have muted colours, but they can actually be quite difficult to navigate, particularly if you've got visual or perceptual difficulties. So we would definitely sort of accented colours. If there's edges or strips or edges of furniture, things like a colourful throw or some highlighted colour can really help you navigate that space. And we'll talk about rugs. We always talk about rugs. I noticed at the start that the sort of the title page at the front had a lovely person in slippers tripping over a grey rug, and that is very much, we would suggest that rugs are definitely limited. However, Fran and I will have talked to many people in their homes over the course of our year, and we know that it feels quite impersonal to pull up rugs, and to, it feels a bit like it can feel like medicalizing your home. Rugs are a real biggie that people trip over. So, if it's on a hard wooden floor, definitely have a rubber back mat that doesn't slide. Thick rugs are a real pain, and if you've got any kind of walking aid, they are just really difficult to navigate, and they do cause a lot of falls. So just really consider whether it's worth it. In other issues are duvets. Long duvets that straddle the floor. Lots of people, I've seen a lot of people trip over duvets. So it's just something to be aware of. So the lady, the picture of the lady on the gym ball. So Sarah, in our case study, takes up Pilates to really look at her core strength and help her gait and balance. But we're going to Fran's going to talk about that in a little while. Now, I don't know if you recognise who this person is in the bottom right-hand corner. I wouldn't if I hadn't Googled it and found her. This is Marie Kondo, who you may have heard of, who's all about reducing clutter and streamlining your home. Now, we're not suggesting you go for full Marie Kondo and remove everything unless it sparks joy. Heaven forbid that would, I'd remove all the vegetables from my house. But think about clutter, trip hazards, cables. We've all got so much tech in our homes. So think about getting those tucked away. Like I say, it's when you're rushing around that you won't notice in your trip. The other thing for Sarah to do is communicate, indicated by these speech bubbles. Talk to people. If you're going out after work and you're going to be tired, things like if you've got weakness, like a foot drop or a partial foot drop, that's going to be worse when you're tired. So it's about considering, we've got the celebratory party in the corner. Absolutely, you need to go out and enjoy yourself and socialize. And just think about, maybe take a spare pair of shoes with you. So when you're tired, you can swap into something a bit more supportive. Think about, where you're going, whether you can have a rest. And also it's about planning your time. So if you're going out one night, try not to overdo it the day before, and think about pacing yourself through the sort of the previous day or during the day, so you can really enjoy yourself when you go out at night. The other thing is to involve other people who you live with. Talk to them about falls risk. If there's bits you're particularly nervous about, like in the garden, talk it through. Are there changes you could make, quite simply. I'm now going to hand back over to Fran, because you've heard enough of me for a few minutes, to talk about sort of strength and activity and balance. So, hand over to you,
Thanks,
Fran.
Fran. So, as Fran said, there's quite a lot around strength and balance that affects how we move and how we walk, and that can affect our risk of falls. And so this graph here on the left-hand side of the screen, it gives some examples of life course events, and these are points of time within our adult life where our activity levels and our strength and balance might be particularly affected. And at these times, it's really important to try and think about how we can increase and really work on our strength and balance to get sort of optimal effects in terms of improving our health and well-being in the future. And so examples of these types of life course events include falls, as you can see, but also surviving a stroke as well would be an example of a life course event and a key time where strength and balance is affected, and where we kind of need to think a little bit more about it. So there are some physical activity guidelines in the UK for adults and older adults. So these are for kind of all adults. But what they suggest is that adults are active for between 75 to 150 minutes per week, depending on how intense that activity is. They also suggest that we all take part in strength and balance activities at least twice a week. Now, that might feel a bit massive and a bit huge. Those numbers are quite scary sometimes, I think. But the key thing to really, to really reassure yourselves and think about is that anything that you do will be beneficial. So everybody can benefit from activity. That includes people who are not active at all. And in fact, they probably are more likely to benefit than somebody that's already doing some activity. So any movement that you can do is better than none. And also another thing to think about is trying to avoid being still for too long. Now, I think I know myself, I do this as well. So we all kind of, without thinking about it, can be sat at our desk. And before we know where we are, it's lunchtime and we've not really got up and moved, or we're watching the TV and we put Netflix on, we watch one episode and then we'll watch another one and another one. And before you know it, you've sat and you've pretty much watched a film when you only sat down for 20 minutes to begin with. So just trying to be more aware of those sorts of times where we are still and thinking about how we can break that up, whether that's going to get a cup of tea, putting things out of reach from your desk so you've got to physically get up and go and walk to it. Next slide, please, Fran. So just to give a few more definitions, which I seem to be doing lots today. So thinking about what we mean by these words. So activity is any movement that requires you to expend some energy. So pretty much every time we move, that's activity. It becomes physical activity where our body physically responds. So you start to notice changes like your heart rate's increasing, your breathing rate's increasing, you might be getting a little bit hot. That's when it becomes physical. So strengthening activities are ones that focus specifically on working the muscles harder. So that usually involves working against some sort of resistance. And then balance activities are ones where it's challenging our ability to stay upright or stable while we're doing specific activities. So that could be standing, it could be reaching, it could be sitting in the chair and keeping in a central position. It could be any kind of movement really, but that would class as balance. Now, that doesn't mean that we all need to go and get some lycra, put on our leg warmers, head off to the gym, join the circus, walk on a tightrope, all those sorts of things. So it can be very basic, simple things that we're already doing within our normal daily life. So things like carrying the shopping, doing the gardening, going for a walk and walking at sort of quite a good pace for you, doing the housework, all of those things could potentially be strengthening and balanced activities. For some people, it might be that you're already part of a formalised, you go to exercise classes or you go to a rehabilitation group, that might be your way of incorporating strength and balance. Other people might prefer sports or might prefer things like dance. And so basically there are lots of different opportunities to build our strength and balance. What I would say is try not to compare yourself to other people, because what that looks like for me is potentially different to what that looks like to you, what it looks like to Fran or Sheila or anyone else. It's going to be different for all of us. And the most important thing really, what do you enjoy? What is going to motivate you to build this into your life and make it a habit? And how is it going to fit within your daily life? How are you going to make that work for you? So next slide, please. So we're going to play a little short video next, which tells us Andy's story. So Andy is going to talk a little bit about his experiences of getting stronger after stroke. And this video was developed by the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy as part of a campaign that they've developed called Stronger My Way. And on their website, which there's a link to, which will be kind of circulated in these slides afterwards, but they've got lots of resources that are specifically for people with long-term conditions about how to incorporate strength into life. So please do check those out if you're interested after the video. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to put myself on mute, and if you want to play that video, it would be great.
Let's hope we get the sound. Right, there we go.
So I'm Andy, and 3 years ago I had a stroke that affected all my left-hand side, so I got no use in my arm and leg, and it affected my speech as well. Before my stroke, I used to rock climb at the local climbing wall, and I played guitar, and I went from that to being in a wheelchair and not being able to do anything for myself. And I wanted to get back to doing those things that I really enjoyed. So initially I had neurophysio with a specialist physiotherapist. She suggested that I use the strength and conditioning classes to build up further and get back to full fitness and strength. And I took a lot of the exercises that I was doing there and started doing them as and when around the house, and I tried to build them into bits of every day almost. If I put the kettle on to make a cup of tea, I've got 2 minutes there where I can do some press-ups or something. And it's just little bits like that and bits of stretches here and there. It's just slotting them in around daily activity. For over a year after I had my stroke, I could feel myself getting stronger and stronger and able to do stuff that I thought, well, I can do that now, and I couldn't do it 3 months ago. It was a really encouraging and kind of motivating thing to keep going with the exercises. It's worth every bit of the effort. So now I go climbing once a week to the climbing wall. I play the guitar as and when I can find time to do it, and I do all sorts of other things. You know, I can cut the grass, I can do the gardening, I can decorate the house. The strength and conditioning were key to getting back to this level of fitness. I feel so lucky and so grateful. It's been brilliant.
I will remove that.
Thanks, Fran. So hopefully that gives some ideas about ways that you can build strength and balance activities into everyday life. And again, just be mindful that obviously Andy's strength and balance will be different. So your way of doing that might look very different, and that's absolutely fine. It's about finding a way that works for you. So specifically thinking about strengthening after stroke, we'd recommend really trying to incorporate a few different types of activities. So daily stretching can be really helpful in terms of maintaining mobility, keeping joints moving well, and keeping those muscles nice and relaxed. Doing some work on core strength and posture. So like in Fran's case study example, with Sarah was going to Pilates, that's really good for building core strength. But it also could be just very simple things like thinking about it and being more aware of your posture when you're doing everyday activities, whether that's sort of lifting your heavy plates out the cupboard or reaching for something. When you're sat in the chair, what's your position like? All those sorts of things can kind of contribute towards that goal of working on core strength and posture. And then there are specific muscle strengthening activities that you can do as well. So we've got some examples of different exercises on the slides here, but that list is endless really. These ones are particularly good because they work on building core strength in core areas like our leg, our core, our arms and our glutes. But also they don't require any equipment. So there's sorts of things that we can do at home with very little space. There's ways of building that into our daily routine. A key thing I think is to build up gradually. So fatigue is obviously is quite a common problem after stroke, and so I would say probably start slowly. Monitor how you're feeling during and after that activity, and then use that to guide how you progress and build up gradually. And it can be really useful to keep like a diary and maybe just a little log and write those sorts of things down to help you to monitor that. But also I think it's really useful to do that in terms of the next point, which is about setting achievable goals. So if you can set yourself a goal and something to work towards, that can be quite motivating. I think we're quite good at noticing what we need to improve sometimes. I know I am, but I don't necessarily always notice when I've done something where I have improved. It's only when somebody else points out that I've achieved something that I see that. So for me, I think writing things down is quite a useful way of looking back and tracking and realizing how far you've come. And it's really important to celebrate those achievements and those wins, no matter how small they are. I think it's really important to kind of keep thinking about the way that we've come and how we've developed along the way. Next slide, please, Fran.
I think this is me again. So we are sort of nearing the end of our talk, and just wanted to take sort of a few things that we want you to take away. Really, is that falls are preventable. And everyone can help to prevent them. There are things everyone can do, and even small changes can reduce the risk of falls. We liken it a little bit to the Olympic cycling team, or winning an Olympic medal in any sport, in that what you do is you make small changes, but lots of small changes added together. You know, if you were cycling, you would have, a slightly more aerodynamic helmet. You'd have slightly tighter lycra, or a slightly faster bike, or a slightly different design of bike, and that would give you, small gains, which would then lead you to win the medal because you'll be slightly faster than someone else. In falls, it's similar. We make lots. So wearing more supportive footwear on its own might not prevent the fall, but that combined with clearing the clutter, doing some extra strength and balance training, all together will help reduce that risk of falls. So even the small changes will add together. I think everyone can, as Fran says, everyone can promote strength and activity. Everyone can do a little bit. As Fran says, it doesn't have to be you know, a sort of a really energetic, high intensity class. It can be fit within your everyday activities, and everyone has the ability to improve their strength and balance regardless of your stroke or other conditions or how old you are. Everyone can improve their strength and balance, and that's what we really want you to sort of take away from today. I think, Fran, you were going to say.
Yeah, just to kind of signpost to a few different resources. So like I say, there's the Stronger My Way resources that are out there that are specifically developed for people with long-term conditions. And there's a section specifically about strengthening after stroke on that website, which might be useful. And there are also some videos of strengthening activities, so you can follow those along and get sort of some instructions that have been developed by physiotherapists about the technique of how to do those exercises. So that may potentially be useful. Sport England have got a campaign called We Are Undefeatable, and you might have seen, sometimes I think there've been TV adverts and things for this. But that one really is more about, it's a movement about trying to promote activity in a way that works for you, and thinking about how you might move on good days and on not so good days, and how you can incorporate different types of activity to help with that. And then the Stroke Association have got some web pages that give a bit more detail around balance problems and also getting movement after stroke, which might be useful to check out.
So, yeah, and so we reached the end. Thank you for listening. We hope that's given you a little bit more information, but we'll open the floor to some questions. And I think, Sheila, do I need to stop sharing now? Is that the...
If you can stop sharing, and I'll go through the questions we've had come in. We've had a couple come in beforehand. The first one is, I have foot drop, however, it was never bad enough to need an AFO. My question is, do you have any suggestions regarding how to remain safe and not fall, specifically when I get tired and it gets worse or drags or I trip?
Fran, do you...
I don't mind. Yeah, shall I start for this one? I think if we think back to what Fran was saying about those causes of falls, I think the key one here is to think about what we can do differently and modify, sort of pace ourselves throughout the day to try and make sure that we've got, if this person's able to have rest throughout the day, does that mean that they're not getting quite so fatigued by the end of the day, which might then help to prevent that trip? Or thinking about organising things so that if there's something that's particularly difficult, that maybe do that earlier in the morning when you've got more energy, and do the things that are perhaps less challenging in terms of balance later on. Other things to think about are in the environment as well. So some of the things that Fran mentioned earlier around thinking if there's anything that could be modified, is there anything that you can do around colour contrast and to make sure that you're able to, so those trip hazards are more noticeable. Thinking about sort of how things are laid out within work or home. Those small things that add up really, I think, are quite important in terms of trying to reduce the trip. And I'm good at banging on about strength and balance, so I'm going to do it again. So that would be my other top tip, is thinking about how you can build strength and balance, how you can do that through your everyday life, or what activities can you do to build that up. And it may be that it sounds like you've got some movement potentially or in strength around that foot. So if you've got any healthcare professionals that you're able to access, have a chat with them, see if there's anything specifically that they can recommend about sort of trying to work on strength and mobility around your ankle joint too. I don't know if you have anything to add there, Fran.
No, I think you've covered everything. I think It's exactly, it's pacing yourself, it's strength and balance. So things like, I know Fran was talking about like core, because obviously with the foot drop, you tend to then rely on lifting your knee a little bit higher, or your hip flexion and your knee flexion to sort of help your foot. So it's, if you can work on your core, that will help give that a really sort of solid sort of base, if you like, to be able to sort of maintain, so you know, that sort of flexion. But no, I think Fran covered everything.
Thank you, and I think your answers cover the next question as well, which is how do you prevent falls when a person is very independent and mobile? So it's removing all the hazards and all that kind of thing that you gave the answer to in the last question, isn't it?
I think so, and it can be really hard. We can sit here and we can tell you to change lots and lots of things that we know will prevent falls, but ultimately it's your life. It's, you know, you have things that you want to do and a life to live, and it's about finding that balance. For, that sounds like a pun, it's not intended to be a pun, but it's finding a balance between things you can change and the risks you're prepared to take, you know, and even just being aware that the things you do or can do, if you're quite mobile and active, might carry a falls risk with them. You might decide it's absolutely worth the risk. You know, I'm just going to take that risk. We're all adults, you know, or you know, we take those decisions every day, crossing the road or whatever. But it's just being aware of them and aware that the decisions you make might impact on the possibility you'll have a fall. We can just make suggestions, and like you say, I think Fran's covered a lot, you know, a lot of those. But we know, you know, we all know that it's hard.
Well, we all know in life you can't anticipate everything, all the barriers and things. This next one is more an observation that a couple have made, but it'd be interesting to hear your outtake on this. In the early years, my husband and I noticed a strange pattern that every time, like clockwork, that I would have a huge fall for no reason the day or two before, making an equally huge jump in some kind of improvement. So they associate a huge improvement coming when she has a fall. Is this a pattern, or is it just what happens in their case?
It's not something that I've heard of in my experience. And I think for Fran, I think we saw this question before, I've had a little chat about it, and neither of us have, we've spoken to a few people and we've not come across that. So it's interesting. And my initial thought is really, what I was wondering is, could it be that sometimes when someone has a fall, it means you stop and you rest a little bit? And could it be linked to that potentially, if sort of having that chance to recover then leads to the improvement? But that's just sort of my own initial observation. It's not, I don't have any evidence for that or anything like that. But yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is an interesting pattern. I wonder if anyone else here has found that. It's not something I've specifically seen, but that's, you know, there's a lot of things that, you know, that come in and are new to us. So yeah, interesting.
Okay, and the questions that have come in while we've been doing the webinar, the first one is, what is neglect?
Yeah, sorry, I should have explained. So it's a change in your sort of spatial awareness, and it can be a particular symptom of stroke, where you are less aware of the affected side of your body, and it can affect. So for example, if you're moving through a doorway, you can catch it on your side, because you're not, you aim to go through the middle, but what you perceive as the middle of that doorway is different, and you're less aware of that side of your body. So in an extreme case, it can be not, you know, your arm hanging down and not realizing it's hanging down, and, you know, having to sort of be prompted to move it. And it's on a spectrum, so you get some people who can find it very, very difficult to think about one side of their body, and for others it is just a case of, you're just more likely to catch it, so on something. It's a change of perception.
Thank you. Moving on, we've got, what guidelines have been issued to healthcare professionals to use in helping people avoid falls?
There, I was leaping in there, Fran. Do you? I'm happy to go.
No, you carry on. You carry on. Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. So there was the back in the day when there was the National Service Frameworks. There is various frameworks, and that's sort of the National Institute for Health Research. I've got frameworks about falls prevention. Now, what I will say is a lot of them are aimed at older people, because there is an increase in falls as we age. They're not inevitable, but that is what tends to happen. Interestingly, there isn't a lot for younger people who fall, but we've been recently looking at some of the research, and there is definitely a pattern where falls increase throughout your risk of falls does increase throughout your life course, particularly women, particularly in middle age. And of course I'm interested in that because I'm a middle-aged woman. So there are sort of guidelines about helping people with falls, exercise, like Fran was saying, sort of the recommended amounts of exercise and strength and balance training. But if you're under 65 and falling, there's actually a limited amount of guidelines. But certainly, as physiotherapists, we see a lot of people who, that's a huge percentage of what we do, even if you're not specializing in sort of older people. So if you are if you're seeing a physio, they should, this will be something that they know about and we're able to talk to you about, definitely. And Fran, have you got anything to add? I think I've waffled there a bit.
Not particularly, no. The kind of the main ones. There's recently been some World Falls guidelines that have been developed as well, but again, like Fran said, they're very, very much really tailored towards older people. I guess a lot of the core components of it would be similar. So what they basically, a lot of them all say is that we need to look at the multiple risk factors of falls and develop sort of interventions or come up with strategies that target those different risks. And that might involve working with different health professionals. So it might mean that there's lots of different professionals that need to be involved in that. But there are also things that individuals can do themselves as well, like we've been talking about today. So I think there is a big gap there in terms of the guideline that's available, but hopefully what is there does provide some sort of some support for not just for health professionals, but for people experiencing falls as well.
Thank you.
And I was sorry, I just thought, because I was just going to add that sort of with employment wise, if you're at work, things like the environmental hazards and that can form part of an occupational health assessment. So if you're working, you're back at work, absolutely, bring this up as part of that assessment, and about those falls risks.
And on that same theme, we've had another question in, which is relevant to a lot of our working age stroke survivors, and it's clutter. Any suggestions on getting a 12-year-old to get it? So there's that to deal with as well.
I have a 12-year-old, so maybe does this qualify me? I'm not sure. It's really hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
We can talk. I mean, show them this video maybe. To say it's hard trying to get buy-in. I think it's just a case of show them, get them to there's on the physiotherapy, the CSP website, which I think Fran had put up, there's some really accessible resources, so maybe sort of get them involved in looking at those. Get them get them involved, get them looking for falls risk and see if you can highlight them around the house, and be proactive. But I feel your pain is an uphill struggle to get them to pick things up, and you know, treading on Lego is never fun. Yeah, it like I say, it has to fit around your life. It's very hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Particularly with children. It's
yes,
tricky.
and it doesn't always improve either. Unfortunately. Somebody's asking, is it good practice to practice getting up from the floor?
Sorry, I feel like we're treading on each other's toes. If it can be, yes. We're about trying to prevent falls, but obviously we can't, like we've said, you know, there's always going to be a risk. And what we call backwards chaining, getting up from the floor, so getting up onto your knees and then using something to sort of lean on and then get your feet underneath you. If you feel like you're having a lot of falls, so if you're having more than a couple of falls in a year, maybe speak to your GP. There are sometimes, again, it's a little bit of a lottery of services, but there are often full services you can key into who will teach you things like backwards chaining to get up off the floor. There is certainly advice around that, on the staying steady, from the sort of the CSPs, from the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy pages. And the other thing is if with the risk of fall, it's getting up, but if you can't get up, it's making sure you've got access to summoning help when you're there. So I mean, it's not so bad these days. We've all got mobile phones. It's not like we've got to go to where there's a phone attached to a wall, but make sure you've got something with you for that. Anything to add, Fran?
No, I think they're the main things. And yeah, I think really I would say to sort of, if you are falling regularly, then I would say contact your GP or your local services, because they should be able to give you a bit more specific support around how you prepare for that happening, but also how you can take some actions to prevent it happening.
Thank you. Where would you recommend to go for some key exercises that people can do to strengthen the muscles to prevent falls?
So again, I think those, I know we keep mentioning it, but the CSP website, I would say, is they've got some really good resources there around sort of strengthening key muscle groups. So they've got written instructions and videos that help with that. There's also something called Staying Steady, which Fran mentioned, which is, it was developed for older people, but they are quite good. It's quite a good booklet that they've got that gives you some strength and balance exercises that you can do. And again, I think there's about 10 of them, so there's not like, it's not like it would. Oh, there you go. You can just about see that with your blurred background.
I know.
Get up and go. That's it. That's better. So that one's quite a nice handy resource that you can just sort of have around the house and fit for you in while you're waiting for the kettle to boil. But again, thinking back to what we were talking about is that for some people doing exercise is a bit boring, and I know I'm a bit like that. So for me, I like to play sports in a team, for instance, and we know that things like racket sports, for instance, like that, they're really good for strength and balance. So although there are specific exercises that are good, it doesn't have to be that. That's not sort of necessarily you have to do these exercises. It's thinking about what works for you, really, because if you enjoy it, you're more likely to do it. We're all, I think, well, I am anyway. It's got to keep you motivated, hasn't it? It's got to be something you want to do, otherwise you're not going to do it.
Well, that's it. Well, thank you very much for your presentation today. It's been very enlightening, and I'm sorry if we didn't get a chance to cover your specific questions, but feel free to email us at info@differentstrokes.co.uk, and we can pass any questions on to Fran and Fran, who are happy to answer them. We'd also be grateful for your feedback today. So if you can just stay online after the session ends to complete the feedback form, that would be fantastic. It should only take a couple of minutes to do, I'm told. The next webinar will be on Friday, the 14th of July, and it's our CEO, Austin, who's going to give us the latest updates from different strokes and do a Q&A session as well. So once again, many thanks for coming today. Thank you.